Guru Nation, I have Dirk Arts on the show. He's somebody that I've admired from afar. He's the founder of Kester, and I mean, he's up to all kinds of things. He's always posting on LinkedIn, so his LinkedIn profile is underneath. There's always interesting stuff too, and I gotta admit, Dirk, your last stuff with the microphone, ear, sunglasses. That you got to roll with that, man. That's the way to roll out in the heart of NYC, dodging traffic. God knows what else you're dodging out there. But it's those are what we need. And today's really struck a chord because first thing I woke up, I read their article Brad posted about the Alzheimer's genetic screening and
Hmm.
ESI or ISI. I used to do studies with them back in the day. And then right after that, I put my comments. I thought it was unbelievable, and I have a lot of opinions on that. But then I saw yours like a few posts later, and I was like, okay, these are two like seemingly unrelated things that, just coincidence that they were posted minutes apart, but they're actually saying essentially the same thing. Although yours is more. I don't know if it's more shocking because it shakes
Mm.
the very foundation of what we've built. I think they're both shocking, but one is worse than the other because one had, you could argue, some malicious intent behind it, whereas the other, maybe it's more a product of being passive or just lazy, right? I think one, you could at least argue for how that could happen. The other, I have no understanding of why they allowed this to happen, but I'm just one person on this planet. So, Dirk, help me make some
Yeah.
sense out of this shit, man. And thank you for joining on a
Yeah, my
rooftop
pleasure.
at a conference, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, I've been, eager to speak with you, and this is a super important topic. So happy to jump on and share my thoughts. I think so. One is the article that appeared in the New York Times about patients being consented into Alzheimer trials where knowing that they had a higher risk for brain bleeds from genetic screening, but they're not sharing those screening results with those patients. So then basically going into a trial with a higher risk profile to actually get more severe brain bleeds from the drug, which seems completely counter to what informed consent is supposed to be about. And then my post, that was indeed a coincidence, but they're definitely related, is about the fact that 50% of patients don't understand, the basic elements of participating in a clinical trial. Specifically, comprehension around placebo and randomization varies between 30 and 50% depending on which trials you look at. Basically, meaning a lot of patients participating in a trial don't really fully grasp the idea that they might not get the treatment, which of course is, basically one of the most essential building blocks of any clinical trial. But I think both topics come back to the fact that it's actually really hard to inform the general public about what a clinical trial is, what the risks are, and what they're getting into. And
Yeah.
I see again and again, and you see it too, Dan, from where you're sitting. I see it as a vendor of software. These informed consent forms are still very long, are still very complicated, are still very much not like tailored towards the health illiterate, of which we have so many in the country because health is complex. There's actually a lot of there's a lack of literacy in general, let alone health literacy. And
Yeah.
so we were not doing enough. I think we're not working hard enough to make sure that these concepts are clear. And then if we're adding on top of that, I think I need to understand more. We haven't had any answers from any of the players involved, so I want to be a little bit careful and like serving judgment here. But it seems very strange that you would withhold information on risk in a trial that is the very essence of informed consent, right? Informing about risks and making sure people understand that. So, yeah, there's a lot of things going on here, and I think we need to fix the fundamental problem of informed consent and comprehension, and we need to definitely make sure that it includes, obviously, sort of information about high risk in trial participation. So, yeah, then I
Yeah.
agree. A lot going on here.
And fixing the first problem of informed consent literacy, for lack of a better word, would not have solved the Isai Advara problem, right? Because
No,
that was not even like a scientist would really know that unless that company disclosed that information. So they're in that regard they're unrelated problems, but they point to similar lack of a foundation, or I guess an unstable foundation in our industry that starts really at the informed consent. It really starts with do no harm, I think. And
Hmm.
I mean, I always tell people GCP, if you want to, obviously you need to go do all the modules, but at the end of the day, it's don't harm the patients. Like that's,
Yeah.
if you learn nothing else from GCP, that's what you learn. And that's a clear violation with ESI, knowingly. Even if it was not regular, like mandated legally, maybe you can argue, well, the genetic screening was proprietary and they can't, scare patients. They have the ethical, in my opinion, obligation. That's their study of disclosing that to the patients. I mean, that's just do no harm. In my opinion, that's an easy one. It's not a complicated discussion.
No, I mean, I think we ideally we get some answers. I think you have to keep in mind, like, if you read the New York Times article, there's a lot of layers to this problem, right? It doesn't start with someone saying, "Oh, you know what, we're just gonna not share that information." It's like, first, should we even allow patients with any brain bleeds into the study? And then it's like, well, they're also at high risk of Alzheimer's, so they're actually a better candidate for fixing Alzheimer's, like for the drug, right? So then there's a lot of academic support initially to allow patients with that makeup into the trial. And then the next step is, well, what do we, how do we determine that, right? How do we assess their risk? And then what is the threshold? And we said 4 brain bleeds seems very arbitrary, also in terms of how hard it is to diagnose these things. Um, and then so we were basically layering. So there's no, I think, individual party in this whole chain of events that you can say, oh wow, you deliberately did that. And I think if you break
Yeah.
out this whole sequence, you'll see like everyone felt that they were doing their job and they were doing the right thing. And
Yeah.
there was an epidemiological study design reason to not share that information because it would bias the outcome.
Yeah.
Or and then sort of the bleak view on that is it would scare the participants away. The participants that might benefit the most from the drug, that would be the story. And so I
Mm.
think it is, I think, good to keep in mind that these things always build on top of each other. Same time, I agree with you. We are basically setting patients up for high likelihood of harm. We knew that, and we didn't tell them about it. I think you could argue, hey, this trial should happen because people should be able to, like, Alzheimer is really bad, like, and it's considered by many the scariest disease that can happen to you. So there's probably a lot of people who are willing to take some risk. But yeah, coming back to the fundamentals of informed consent, they should know that they're exposing themselves to that increased risk so that they can make an informed decision with their loved ones, with their physician on, like, is this risk of a brain bleed worth slightly better cognitive abilities in the context of my developing Alzheimer's? That is the question that people should really be thinking about. So they should have all the information. Um, so I agree. Not sharing that is not necessarily delivering on the do no harm concepts that we all have. I'm an MD PhD. I swore an oath to do those things. Most people involved in this whole trajectory did that too. But it's fascinating to see how many things can be explained away, right? By referring to the person before you, or by the regulations, or someone else did it already in another trial. But that's not an excuse, in my opinion.
Yeah, and especially when you have like the smoking gun really seemed to be, and I only read the article, so of course there's nuances and way more things I don't know than what I do know from reading it. The genetic biomarker was clearly like the smoking gun of like, yeah, all these patients are at risk of bleeding, but the patients with this genetic screening of positive biomarker or whatever, the drug was going to harm them more likely than others. That should have been disclosed in my opinion. That's all I'm saying. Alzheimer's studies are not fun. They're not, there's no rainbows at the end of it. I've done plenty of Alzheimer's studies myself, with Eisai actually, but not this drug. I did Aricept. One of the first things I did was look which drug it was. It wasn't the one I did the studies with, but yeah, I mean that to me, that's where the clear, like, there's no gray area at that point, unless I'm missing more things.
I think with the information we have, I see that too. I agree with that. Again, there's probably a lot more to it. There's a lot
Yeah,
more subtlety to
yeah,
it. But if you look at it like this from the outside, you get all the information presented at once. You're like, holy shit. And that's of course why the New York Times jumps in it too.
yeah. But
Nobody
25
gets
years
it.
later, like 25 years later, it's probably patent protection's already expired. They probably they've generated all the revenue they could from this. So it doesn't do much to bolster pharma's image in the public. right? Which this now relates to more your post of half of the people don't even know what placebo is, which I have some thoughts on this as a site owner. I mean, you can argue you don't need to understand what a placebo and randomized means to be fully informed, in my opinion, under the context of GCP. I
Yeah, I
have
mean,
a,
are you telling them? I think as long as you're telling them, look, there's a good chance, basically 50% in most studies, that you are at least initially not getting any treatment, and so you might not get better at all. Do you understand that that is what you're committing to? Well, you're still going to have all the blood draws, and you're going to have to show up, and you're going to follow the exact protocol, and there's going to be zero benefit for you initially. Going to be
yeah,
benefit to the world, to the population, to people after you. If that is crystal clear, I think you don't have to exactly understand, well, how does the placebo work, and what is the placebo effect, and what is randomization. No, I think the thing is, like, there's a high likelihood, usually about 50%, that you're not going to get any active treatment, and so your health won't improve in that period, and you're still going to be burdened. But I
correct.
wonder, and honestly, like, I need to dig in deeper into the studies. How do you get to a point where that concept is not understood? Because that is not that hard to explain. Um, but I mean, I have to trust there's multiple reviews that are stacking, like, 20 to 30 papers on top of each other where this has been measured. So I think it gets lost in translation or in the heat of the moment. You probably know more, and same with Brad, like how these conversations go. And I've spoken to Brad about this. I think he mentioned that they really, I think, take the time. I think you maybe you operate differently from like the large academic size where there may be more time pressure.
Mm.
I'm not sure, but it seems like the process isn't. The informed consent scores definitely aren't working. We already knew that. Yet we still keep producing the 17-page horror documents that are
17.
even strict. I
What
mean,
study are you doing? It's like 40. They're
yeah,
like
I mean, yeah,
40 pages.
yeah. Like, what do we expect? It's
And in all those 40 pages, they can't put a sentence about the genetic biomarker on the previous study. I mean, it's ridiculous.
yeah, yeah, it's strange. But like, what is your view on this process when your people are taking patients through that? Like,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
does it, how effective is it? How does it, do you
To
do
to
you
me, it's
envision?
simple. To me, it's simple. It starts with one of the earliest realizations I had of the patient's mentality. It was decades ago when I started doing consents for myself the first time. Patient were intimidated like it's a contract. So the first thing I tell them, this is not like signing a lease agreement or buying a car. This is not like holding you to anything. This is for us to disclose what's required to you. This is not, you can quit. If you sign this form right now and in 5 minutes you say, I don't want to do it, you can leave. Like this is for us. This is not. So that was the first hurdle is when they see a 40-page document, they get intimidated. It's like, oh, what am I committing to? What am I signing myself up for? They think it's like a mortgage or a car payment. So that was the first realization. Once you get over that, you start getting into this conversation of voluntary. Then you bring up however the study is designed. Some are designed better than others where there's an open label period. So, hey, even if these first 6 weeks you might get placebo. If you hold on, you will get the drug eventually, and we explain that part. Some studies don't have that. Some sponsors start offering new incentives, like a lot of these obesity things now. They're looking at second order effects of obesity. So, they're not even testing the obesity drug, they're testing another drug, and the obesity drug's kind of like a retention tool, like everyone gets this one. So there's still some benefit. Again, with obesity or depression studies, there's the whole counseling part. So you are meeting with a therapist every time, even though they're a rater, they're still to some extent act like a therapist, the coordinators. So there is, even if you're on placebo, there are still some benefits you could argue. I think in weight loss studies and in depression, it's more complicated because the weight loss, even if you're on placebo, there are studies on this. Just knowing that you're coming to be weight is enough incentive for you to want to lose weight, right? So there's proof that even the placebo arms lose some weight. It's just not as much as the regular arm for the most part. And
Super interesting.
in depression, just getting out of the house sometimes, right? Just coming to the clinic, that's a victory in and of itself. I'm dressed, I'm bathed, even if I'm on placebo, I got out of the house. Now I could do something else for my day other than sitting in bed. So these are the studies I've done. But yeah, do no harm. voluntary. These are the known side effects. We don't know all of them yet, but these are what's known, and these are the assessments that you are gonna be doing. I mean, that's to me, it's not complicated. This takes like 30 minutes usually, 30, 45 minutes in my experience.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, I'm going to do some more digging. Like, how long is the average call, consent call? We have some data, so we RE consent does remote consent as well through video. So we have some logs on like how long these conversations take, which seems to be in like the 20 to 30 minute range. But I
Mhm.
wonder what the average is. I could actually imagine that if you do this centrally, so you have someone centrally taking the time on a video call, they might be less rushed than when it's like in the rush of an academic site or something.
Yeah,
But I agree with everything you said, and I feel like, and on top of that, like what I presented in my video that you referred to, audio visual supports, interactiveness, like the basic things. We have so many tools now to break down these complex information into something that's much more understandable. I'm not saying we shouldn't get a signature on a more formal document. I get it, but why not use the tools available to give people a little bit more time to watch your video? Like, if you can't summarize your study in 30 seconds in a sort of TikTok style video, like, come on. Yeah, of course, there's a lot more to it, but the core concept, there's a lot of shit we can cram into a 30-second video, maybe even a 1 minute video that holds the attention span. Like, zero human beings are able to keep their attention span on a 40-page document. That is just
right,
not what the brain is wired to do.
right,
We don't have
right.
the working memory to retain the information we're reading. Like, it's almost like a large language model with a context window, right? Like, our
Yeah.
context window isn't that large. When we're on page 12, like, we're going to struggle to hold that information from page one if there's no level of interactivity. Like, how do we study for tests when we were younger? We read the information, we test ourselves, we test our friends, we do flashcards or whatever, and we proceed and we revisit it again. Like, if you look
Yeah.
at how we learn as humans, we do not learn from reading a large document once. They learn probably most from speaking to you, right? Like the interactive element of it, conversations.
Right.
It might still be intimidating. This is the first time they're hearing it, so we can stage it out. We just know people learn and comprehend better,
Yeah.
versus video. Then it's a flyer. Then they start to think about it. Then they meet you. Then they go, you give them the talk track, and then they go through the document. I think we're in a completely different world. Are these things really so
But I
difficult to do?
think I think that the nuance with the study you shared about 50% don't know, and something you just said, which I could push back a little bit on. So to do an informed consent, the goal is not to teach the patient necessarily, like about research. I mean, that's maybe a nice side effect of going through a study, but you're not teaching them research, right? You're informing them of the risks and what the study is going to be about. So I think maybe there's some confusion in that study of maybe they're testing patients on these terms that it's not really like they have no interest in anyways, like randomization. They don't care. Like I've had these conversations, I've tried to educate and they don't really care. They're just like, can I withdraw when I want to? Okay, like what's the worst that could happen? I mean, who wants to answer that one? The worst that could happen is you
Yeah.
just die. Like we don't know, So I mean that ultimately you're not really teaching a patient the nature of the study. So it's a little different than learning, but I don't disagree with you either. It's just there's not time to teach someone
Yeah, I
when you're
agree. I think
consenting.
the point is not that you can then quiz them and be like, okay, give me the definition of placebo, give me the definition of randomization. That's not the
Yeah,
point. But I think the point would be that if you speak to them a week later, like, hey, could you just like tell it back to me? Like, what exactly does it mean to participate? Like, how likely are you to get the treatment? Like, those questions. Like, I think they should be able to answer those. I don't think it's about definitions, but it's
I
about like
see.
truly understanding what it means. But I don't know how they tested it in these studies, so I will do some more digging.
Yeah,
Like, did they ask for placebo definitions, or did they ask about the understanding of what it means to be in a placebo-controlled study,
right,
which is what I would assume they did.
right.
But I would need to really dig into the underlying papers to answer that question.
Yeah, it's the devil's in the detail. There's this little book. I have it at my site. I'm sure you read it. It's this thin, written in the 40s. It's called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's fascinating, fascinating read. So I mean, maybe there's something to do with it, but I think most patients, at least at our sites and the sites I've been involved with, they understand, okay, well, I'm not guaranteed the drug. I remember the coordinator said something about week 24. I think everyone gets the drug. but I'm not exactly sure. So when I go back, I'll ask them again. You know, like I think that's like more of the standard of people's understanding of what they're getting into. Even if they have the forms with them, they're not going to necessarily go. And those things are complicated. You ever look at one of those like schedule of assessment and they have the flow chart and I mean you don't really care at that point. You're just going to ask your coordinator at the next visit.
I I'm with you. I wonder though, right? I think a lot of those studies that were referred in these papers, I think people would think the same way. I am willing to believe that you are doing a better job informing these patients than than the average site or maybe the average study. However, I would put money on the fact that you are probably overestimating how well people understood you, right? So I'm not
For
saying that you're not
sure.
doing a great job and
For
you're doing a
sure.
better job than most, but it's very easy for us to like. I have this all the time, right? I'm a CEO of a company. I explain things. I'm like, I did such a terrific job at explaining this thing. Like I broke it down. You know, I started with the why. Man, like that should be absolutely crystal clear. And then I get questions. And I'm like, wait, I just all right, I'm gonna explain it again. And in the end, they're like 100 human factors for why they weren't actually really paying attention that much, or they were distracted, or somehow didn't register, or somehow they were on a different line of thought that made them misread what you were trying to say. I think it's easy to overestimate how well people comprehend what you actually just share with them, even though you think you're doing a terrific job. And it could just be that they're still so stressed about everything that's going on with them that they're being like, yes, yeah, I got it. And then a week later, it just wasn't imprinted, even though they seemed to understand it in the moment. It wasn't just like it didn't
Yeah.
lodge itself in their brain. I don't know. I think these are real challenges in clinical trials. You're doing it when people are in a bad place, usually.
You are a lot of times, yes. And there's the old adage, which is absolutely true. Informed consent is not a one-time process, it's a continuing process. And every study visit is really another opportunity to re-explain and reiterate the important points, especially if you see the patient's maybe not fully understanding something. I just had a patient recently text me, hey, what was the name of that study drug I was in? You know, and I mean, they have the consent. They could have looked themselves, but they wanted me to tell them, which tells you it's a lot easier to just get the answer from a human than even the paper you have, yourself. And she had it emailed, hard copied. I mean, and she still rather text me. It was just easier. So I think that's
And
speaks to
so,
your point.
how did you feel when she asked that question? Were you like, whoa, really? Or like, how did it make you feel?
I understood what she was getting at because it's a generic name, so the study had a number. So what she was really asking was what was the generic name? But like in this case, you have to know what they're trying to ask you, right? So, and then I asked why, and she said, "Well, I have this, my other doctor wanted to know because he wants to rule out something." So then I told her, and she said, "Yeah, thank you for that." She was getting at the generic class, right? Not the name of the
Yeah,
compound, like bunch of letters and numbers, which no doctor's gonna know what the hell that means anyways.
yeah, understood. Interesting example, actually. There's probably a
But
lot more of that for sure.
and that's how people think, study participants. And if you have a good site, you're there for your patients even after the study's over. And I agree with you. The AMCs, this is missing from a lot of those places. These are large, humongous organizations where there's almost no soul inside, right? And I think
Well,
it
I think
speaks to the
I
small
think they're
sites.
full of people with souls. I just think that the work pressure and the amount of work they need to do, I mean, you read Reddit, I read Reddit. I'm not sure where all these people work, but there's a lot of people out there who are not having a great day, I think, doing these activities, and not because they don't care. They probably got into it because they care.
Yeah.
But what the system consists of all these different actors and stakeholders, is ultimately pushing them to just do way more than you should probably do in a
Yeah.
short amount of time.
Yeah.
And if you have to choose between answering queries or spending 15 more minutes with the patient, I think that's a realistic scenario. Like that becomes a tough challenge.
Man,
because
give me
otherwise you're
15 hours with the patient over any query, please. I'll take the patient all day. And the small sites are now without blame. My own, a year ago, brand new coordinator, she wouldn't tell, I caught this on the second time. She wouldn't tell the patient they screen failed. Like, I'm like, did you inform this patient? They're waiting probably for your next call. Oh no, I didn't yet. I didn't know what to say. And that was my fault because I didn't really communicate, hey, when they screen fail, you need to let them know why and that we have other studies and this and that. So it's not like the size of the organization makes a difference. I think it's the quality of the training and the individuals that you bring on.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's frustrating because it's really hard to solve it in a scalable way, right? It would still require some level of human
Yeah.
attention or monitoring
Well, I have more
until we get
respect
to.
for what you're trying to do because you are like this is kind of an unscalable problem to solve. I mean, if informed consent was just a one-time thing and that's it, maybe you can scale it. But I think because it's a process, right? Every time they come in is really re-education. I'm sure you can scale that to some extent, but ultimately it depends on the individual to execute, not the tools necessarily. I mean, the tools can help, but the
Exactly.
individual has to execute on that process.
But tools can definitely help. I think there's a lot of ways we can go after this. We can have to go after this problem for sure. And there is going to be time where some form of technology is going to answer a lot of these questions. I'm putting it a little bit vaguely without a timestamp on it, but that's on the horizon, and I think it's going to be better for everyone. But it's going to be a while before we trust technology to take a first pass at answering a question from someone in a clinical trial. That is going to take time, but that horizon is there, and so that could help. But it's going to be a lot of concerns and questions along the way. So for now, I agree. It's
Yeah.
going to take a lot of time and effort to
I
tackle this challenge.
I do think videos would be helpful, but I think videos would incentivize the coordinator to be hands off. And I think that's an unintended consequence. Because if you just push play, now the responsibility is on this video and not so much on me. And then what do you do when you're given like a 10-minute video to watch in a room? Like, yeah, you're gonna check your phone, see what's going on TikTok, fuck this video. Like, if it's important, the coordinator is gonna tell me when they come back.
It was I rented a jet ski a while back, and basically with these things now they just give you a video, right? Like, here, watch a video about water safety, whatever. I've
Yeah.
watched it now many times, so I do what you just said. But then we go
Fuck
out in
this
the
video.
water. They give you no actual instructions. It's like, okay, well, you watched the video, so here's the fucking jet ski, and I don't know how much horsepower it has. And there's these two guys, they're like 19 ahead of me, just ramming the throttle like crazy. And like within, I think like 90 seconds, they just launch themselves off the jet ski, like they're flying through the air, crashing into the water, both laying in the water for like 5 minutes, completely dazed. And I'm like, yeah,
Fuck.
no, that video clearly did the job. And the
Exactly.
guide was like, 100 meters ahead of them. Even the guy was like, all right, well, you know, you should have probably taken it easy. Like, well, you could have also maybe, stay with them
E-
a little bit in the beginning. But yeah, that's
Exactly, man. What I found best, like, I think what Brad and I have in common and why we get along on a lot of things is we MacGyver different solutions. So for some studies, we get this consent and they don't have videos. Sometimes the sponsors give you, but that's rare. But it's nice to have like something different to break the pattern of communication. So what I found on one study was a investor video on the mechanism of action of the study drug. It was a 2-minute video. It was made for investors, but it went really in depth and well produced on the science. Not IRB approved, but I would show patients that during the consent. Like, hey, here's the video from the drug company on the mechanism of
that's
action. Like
interesting. But
that
how does
goes
that work though? Like,
it went
well,
over most people's heads, but the fact that it was only a minute and a half or 2 minutes, it showed them that there's a lot, if nothing else, it showed them there's a lot that they don't understand and we don't understand, but there's a level of detail that they can't even imagine that's going on. and
So you
it
can do
kind
that
of
because it's part of the consent process. You just weave it in as if you were
I
requested
just
it.
did it because I told my PI about it, and he said that's good to inform the patients too. It's not replacing
Interesting.
the consent form. It's just
No,
a
exactly.
supplement. Like we get to like page 4 when it talks about the known side effect and how it works, and then I say, hey, but I have like a video to show from the company itself. Not IRB approved, but the company made this. This is public information on the video.
Yeah.
For
Right.
another study, I found this was a one with 50 page. I found a TikTok user who is like a nursing school student, and he makes videos on new compounds, like to teach people. And so I found, because I couldn't find anything even on the company website on this drug. So I found this TikTok video and I ran it by my PI. I'm like, what do you think of this? I bring this in during like this part. And he watched it. He said, yeah, I think that's good. So it kind of humanizes the process a little. I mean, we obviously don't tell IRB we're doing this because they wouldn't even know what to reply with, but you just you just do it, and I think it was a nice supplement to the requirement. If nothing else, then to break down the complex into something
Yeah.
more simple. I mean, you
But
try
I
to
would
do
what
what
I
you
would
can.
wish I would wish is that we can just find a way so we can just get the RBs to formally embrace this. You're at the bleeding edge. You're trying to do things differently. I bet that the vast majority of sites wouldn't even consider
They would get
something like that.
fired at a AMC. You'd get fired for doing what I just did.
So how do we get to a point that what you are doing becomes the new normal, right? Like, yeah, if somebody reviews that the content is accurate, right, and
Yep.
is well put together, let's go. I mean, there's so much out there,
Hmm.
and you could always be like, hey, by the way, I'm not telling you this, but I'm shoving a note here under the table. Just take a look at this. It's not part of the study process, but it's out in the public domain, so you can find it on your own if you just Google. Just type these words into Google,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and you'll find it's kind of a weird dynamic, right? Like the information is out there.
yeah.
Probably better off reviewing it and saying, hey, we stand behind this content, than allowing people to just search everything on their own and then not knowing what to trust and just watching a bunch of poorly put together YouTube videos. It's this whole I'm struggling with that concept of where we are right now. That basically it's like, well, the only thing we want to send to the REB is the 50-page informed consent form and a bunch of screenshots.
Yeah.
We don't want to like make it more complicated. Well, you know, maybe we should take a little bit of extra time so every single patient that goes into the trial knows exactly what they're doing and why it's important, and they have a higher likelihood of staying in there. It's just a business benefit.
Well, it's
Spend a
the
little bit more
extra
time up
step.
front.
It's the extra step that, so the bare minimum is, and really what the informed consent is for. I mean, yeah, it's nice to say it's to inform patients. If there was no regulation around that, like if a concentration camp didn't happen during World War II, it might be a world where we have like a very like not thorough consent process. It's to prevent liability from the drug company. So did the patient sign this form? Okay, move on. They don't necessarily care that the patient is aware of the drug or I mean they just want them to sign that form and move on. I think the sites care because that's their patient. To the drug company, this patient is a number, literally a number. To us, it's someone that could do future studies, or it's a patient of one of our PIs, or it's a family member or a community member. Like these are not just numbers. So we should be the ones. Now we're going to use your philosophical background. There should be some morality here, and who should it come from? I think it should come from the ones that have the most interaction with the patients and the most to lose from harm being done to the patients.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's a great starting point. But I do think I want to aim a little bit higher and make sure that everybody in the process cares. I know that's not
Yeah.
happening, but it's this collective this collective malfunctioning, right? We are sometimes the opposite of a hive mind, as opposed to all of humanity thinking together. We are like explicitly thinking in silos and explicitly thinking, okay, this is my box. I just need to make sure that the legal language is all right. And then because there's a legal team that needs to sign off on something, even though the study team wanted to do better, I've seen this happen. Like, the legal teams are basically have final say because that's where liability is hinged on. And
Yeah.
so the study team's like, well, couldn't we do this? Could we do that? No, like, and we have created a system where I feel even if across the board everyone has the right intentions, we could still like maneuver ourselves in a position where nothing comes from it. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, if at least the sites can be the most humane because they have the most human interaction, I think that's a great place to start for sure.
And they live in the community. I mean, they're part of the community. Like the drug company is this multinational entity, they're doing this worldwide, but I think the heart of it lies in the communities. And by the way, I told one of those sponsors that I do that with the videos. Like after the study, they do this breakdown of how did you like the study, blah, blah, blah. So I told them, I said, I found your investor video. I ran it by my PI. We don't put it in our process of consent, SOP, because that's auditable, but just between you and I, we did this for a good amount of our patients, and it worked well. I think in the future you should consider making like a short video to accompany the ICF, and they were really happy I did that, and I think that's the prevailing sentiment I get from sponsors, like when we come to SOS and talk, is hey, we're glad you're taking the initiative to do this stuff. We have a lot of red tape. Academic centers do too. You don't. And we need like kind of the innovation happens where you push against the framework, right? And there's pros and cons to that, but the overall like majority of the time they're happy that we're taking that initiative kind of with a wink wink behind it. So they're happy about it, I think.
Nice, very nice,
Yeah.
great.
But I'll let you go back to your conference because we need to do a proper sit down
Yeah,
of
let's do it. This was
here.
fun.
The
Great.
fact that you're an MD and a doctor of philosophy at the same time, I mean, that's 3 hour podcast, just that alone.
There's many of me out there. Trust me.
Well, get yourself back to wherever you need to go. What conference is that, by the way? Can you share?
It's Bio Future here in
Ah,
New York.
any good?
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting to see companies presenting themselves.
How many
It's
sites?
a
How
lot
many
of.
sites?
I think I haven't come. Well, I think One Side Network. I've seen One Side Network here
Ah,
so far.
okay. Okay.
But I'll do some more due diligence.
All right, man. Well, keep posting. Everyone go connect right now with Dirk underneath. His LinkedIn is a must follow. Just keep those videos coming, man, especially with that one
I will.
mic
Oh,
mic
sunglasses.
earpiece and the
The weather
sunglasses.
works.
It's clean, man. You look good.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. You're amazing.
Like,
See ya.
subscribe, comment, share, go follow Dirk. Bye-bye.